Would you describe, in your own words, what happened that night?
Check it, bleed. Bro was on. Didn't trip, but the folks was freaking, man. Hey, the pilots were laid to the bone, home. So blood hammering out and damn, Jim, shit. Tighten that bad sucker side the runway like a mother. Shit.
1982 is often remembered for major releases that pushed technology forward and redefined what audiences expected for movies.
All right. Well, who's the creep with the fingers?
What's the problem, honey?
One of these two creeps is pumping my buns.
Oh, yeah? Which one? Goodbye.
It was a year filled with ambitious ideas, heavy competition, and rapid changes in how films were being made. But when attention is concentrated on a few dominant titles, other films, even ambitious ones, can struggle to find space.
Calling you a liar and a cheat and a fat, porky son of a bitch. You want to hear any more? I got other things I can think up for you.
As a result, some films from 1982 did not perform as expected during their initial runs. Still, many of them continued to remain part of film discussions, revisits, and long-term appreciation. These are the movies from 1982 that did not connect widely at release, but did not disappear either. Tron attempted something few films have done before, placing its entire concept inside a digital world. The story followed a programmer transported into a computer system, where programs existed as living entities.
I want him in the games until he dies playing.
At the time, its visual style stood out, but it also created a barrier. The heavy reliance on early computer tech felt unfamiliar, and the concept itself was difficult for general audiences to immediately grasp. Its initial performance reflected that gap. However, as technology advanced and digital environments became more common, the ideas behind Tron became easier to connect with. It's now often referenced when discussing early attempts at blending computering with storytelling. The Beastmaster combined fantasy, action, and adventure, following a warrior with the ability to communicate with animals. The film presented a mix of sword and sorcery elements during a time when the genre was still finding consistency.
You old fool!
It did not draw large crowds during its release. The tone, pacing, and style didn't fully align with broader expectations at the time. Over the years, it became more recognizable through repeated exposure. Its character, setting, and straightforward storytelling allowed it to remain present within fantasy films from the early 1980s.
Don't move. The beast is fierce. But if we show no fear, we might escape.
The Dark Crystal stood apart immediately, built entirely around puppetry and practical effects. It created a world that felt detailed but also unconventional.
No, Fizzgig, you stay here. Dole. Oh, all right. Come on. Tamar.
For audiences expecting lighter fantasy, the tone was darker and more serious. The absence of human characters also made it harder for some viewers to connect right away. Because of that, its initial reception was mixed, but its craftsmanship and world building continued to draw attention over time. It is now often pointed as one of the most unique examples of practical effects and creative design within the genre. Cat People blended horror with psychological elements and strong visual themes. The film leaned into atmosphere and tension rather than straightforward scares. release, it divided viewers. Its tone, pacing, and subject matter did not align with more traditional expectations of horror at the time. Later discussions often focus on its visual style and approach. It remains part of discussions about horror films that relied more on mood and interpretation than direct presentation. Deathwish 2 continued a story that previously drew strong reactions. This installment leaned further into its core premise, presenting a more intense and direct approach. It faced heavy criticism and did not perform at the level expected for a sequel. The tone and content limited its broad appeal. Even so, it remained connected to larger conversations around its franchise. Its presence continued through association with the original film and its place within the series.
You believe in Jesus? Yes, I do. Well, you're going to meet him.
The Thing combined science fiction with horror, focusing on isolation, paranoia, and uncertainty. The film relied heavily on practical effects and a slow-building sense of tension. At the time, it struggled to find an audience. Its tone was bleak, its pacing deliberate, and it arrived alongside more bigger releases. Later on, attention shifted towards its technical execution and atmosphere. Its approach to suspense and its use of effects have been examined closely in later discussions about filmmaking techniques. These are the films from 1982 that struggled during their initial release, but together shared one outcome. They stayed relevant in different ways.
Johnson!
They weren't the movies that made the year. They were the ones that continued to be revisited, and in many cases, that lasting presence ended up mattering more than their initial release.